The discovery. In the perpetual twilight of Scaris AI, where volcanic ash painted the sky in shades of amber and rust, Kalin worked his forge with the rhythm of generations past. The abandoned planet bore the scars of its industrial glory, crumbling factories stretched toward the horizon like skeletal fingers, and the air tasted of metal and forgotten dreams. Kalin's ancestors had been brought here as laborers by an empire that vanished as suddenly as it had appeared. What remained was a desolate world and a trade passed down through bloodlines, the art of forging weapons and machines for masters who no longer existed. The underground workshop where Kalin spent his days was carved deep into the planet's crust, its walls lined with ancient machinery that hummed with residual power. It was here, while searching through corroded data archives, that he first encountered the records that would change everything. The metal tablets were covered in symbols that seemed to shift in the dim light, but Kalin had learned to read the old script from his grandfather. What he found made his blood run cold: schematics of a creature bound in chains, described only as the Silenced One. The diagrams showed something magnificent and terrifying, a fusion of organic matter and alien technology, designed for battle in a war that had torn the galaxy apart. At first, Kalin dismissed it as mythology, stories told to frighten children. But the more he studied the records, the more real it became. Coordinates were etched into the final tablet, pointing to a location deep beneath the planet's surface. Sleep became elusive as obsession took hold. Each night, Kalin found himself drawn back to the archives, tracing the cryptic clues left by his world's former oppressors. His hands grew calloused from handling the ancient tablets, his eyes strained from deciphering the faded symbols. The coordinates led him through forgotten tunnels that wound deep into Scaris AI's core. Following passages that hadn't seen light for centuries, Kalin descended into the planet's depths, guided only by his torch and an inexplicable pull that seemed to resonate from the very stones around him. After days of searching, he found it, a colossal chamber sealed by reinforced metal gates that bore the same symbols as the tablets. The locks were complex, designed by minds far more advanced than his own, but centuries of decay had weakened them. With tools inherited from his forefathers and patience learned through years of solitary work, Kalin began the painstaking process of opening what had been sealed for so long. As the final lock clicked open and the massive gates groaned apart, Kalin stepped into a chamber that defied comprehension. The air itself seemed to pulse with dormant energy, and in the center, wrapped in chains of impossible strength, lay something that should not have existed. The dragon was more magnificent and terrible than any legend could describe. The Awakening. The creature before Kalin transcended every notion of what a dragon should be. Its scales shimmered between obsidian black and deep azure, each one etched with intricate metallic patterns that pulsed with faint bioluminescent energy. Threads of circuitry ran beneath its hide like veins of liquid starlight, flickering as if responding to some internal rhythm. Its wings, massive and terrifying, were pinned to the chamber walls by chains that seemed to be forged from the same alien metal as the gates. The bond stretched taut like a spider's web of enslavement, each link humming with residual power designed to contain something far beyond mortal comprehension. For long minutes, Kalin stood frozen, his torch trembling in his grip. The dragon lay perfectly still, its chest rising and falling with the slow breath of deep slumber. But as he stepped closer, drawn by a mixture of terror and fascination, those ancient eyes slowly opened. They were deep emerald pools that held the weight of eons, twin orbs of intelligence that had witnessed civilizations rise and fall, stars being born and dying, entire galaxies reduced to cosmic dust. In their depths, Kalin saw reflections of battles fought across the void, worlds burning under the light of dying suns, and the terrible price of ambition. The dragon's gaze fixed on him, and Kalin felt as though his very soul was being examined and weighed. Without conscious thought, he found himself moving toward the chains, his hands working to unfasten locks that had held for centuries. Perhaps it was madness, or perhaps it was destiny, he couldn't tell which anymore. Each chain that fell away seemed to awaken something deeper within the creature. Its breathing grew stronger, the patterns on its scales pulsed brighter, and a low rumble began to emanate from its throat, not quite a growl, not quite a song, but something that spoke of power barely contained. When the final chain struck the chamber floor with a resounding clang, the dragon rose. Its movement was fluid grace and terrible purpose combined, each muscle and mechanical component working in perfect harmony. The creature stretched its wings to their full span, and the chamber suddenly seemed impossibly small. The rumble grew louder, vibrating through Kalin's bones and into his very core. This was not merely sound, it was a declaration, a proclamation of freedom long denied. The dragon's eyes blazed with renewed intensity, ancient rage and bitter wisdom swirling in their depths. Human, the dragon spoke, its voice like thunder rolling across distant mountains, layered with harmonics that spoke of languages lost to time. You have unshackled me after centuries of enslavement. Explain your purpose. Kalin's mouth went dry. He had expected many things, but not this, not intelligence, not speech, not the terrible weight of responsibility that now pressed down upon his shoulders. I didn't know, he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. I thought you were myth, legend. I didn't mean to disturb your rest. The dragon studied him with those penetrating eyes, seeing through any pretense he might have harbored. In freeing me, you have taken a step beyond the boundaries of your understanding. I am the scourge of stars, forged in cosmic fires, enslaved by your kind's ambition and cowardice. The creature lowered its massive head until it was level with Kalin's face, bathing him in the eerie blue glow of its scales. You, small one, have freed me. I owe you nothing, and yet, fate is not without its ironies. With that proclamation, the dragon's wings flared wide, and energy crackled through the air like captured lightning. The remaining chains, old and rusted, shattered and fell away, unable to hold against the creature's immense strength any longer. The sound that followed was part roar, part song, and part warning to the universe itself. Freedom, raw and unchecked, had been reclaimed, and Kalin realized with growing horror that he had unleashed something far more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. First flight. The dragon turned its attention back to Kalin, who stood trembling in the creature's shadow. Despite his fear, something deeper stirred within him, a recognition that his quiet life as a blacksmith had ended the moment he'd opened those ancient seals. Tell me, blacksmith, the dragon said, its voice now carrying a note of curious inquiry, are you bound to this world? The question was layered with meaning Kalin couldn't fully grasp. This is my home, he replied, finding his voice growing steadier. I've known nothing else. My ancestors were brought here as slaves, just as you were chained. We've been left here, forgotten. A silence settled between them, heavy with unspoken understanding. Both were prisoners of circumstance, shaped by the ambitions of others, abandoned when those ambitions crumbled to dust. Then perhaps, little Smith, the dragon said, its tone softening with what might have been recognition, there is a reason our paths have crossed. With hesitant steps, Kalin approached the magnificent creature. The dragon seemed to be studying him, weighing his worth, measuring something invisible but crucial. It tilted its massive head, bringing one ancient eye level with Kalin's face, and for a moment, the blacksmith saw himself reflected in that emerald depth, small, insignificant, yet somehow important. Do you understand, human, the dragon murmured, its voice now almost reflective, what lies beyond the stars is not a place for the weak. I have seen galaxies crumble, stars extinguished by the ambition of mortals and creatures far greater than you. Kalin nodded, though he didn't entirely understand. All he knew was that everything familiar had shifted, replaced by something vast and dangerous beyond his comprehension. Without warning, the dragon lowered itself, folding its immense wings and presenting its back to Kalin. The invitation was clear, terrifying, and irresistible. Metallic ridges ran along the creature's spine, providing handholds that seemed almost designed for a rider. Kalin hesitated, feeling the weight of what he was about to do. But the same madness that had driven him to seek out the dragon's resting place now compelled him forward. He grasped the metallic ridges and, with a deep breath that might have been his last as a simple blacksmith, pulled himself up. The dragon's hide was warm beneath him, pulsing with energy that seemed to flow through both organic tissue and technological components. As Kalin settled into position, he felt the creature's muscles tense beneath him, preparing for something he couldn't imagine. "Hold fast, little smith," the dragon warned, and then they were moving. The ascent through the cavernous chamber was swift and breathtaking. Rock walls blurred past as they rose through shafts that led toward the surface, the dragon's wings barely fitting through passages that seemed to have been carved specifically for this purpose. Kalin's world, both literal and figurative, opened before him as they burst through the underground complex into the twilight sky of Scaris AI. The wind whipped past them with incredible force as the dragon climbed higher, its powerful wings beating with a rhythm that spoke of freedom long denied. Below them, the barren landscape of Kalin's home spread out like a map of desolation, the crumbling remnants of ancient industry, the twisted volcanic formations, the dust-covered ruins of a civilization that had abandoned this world centuries ago. But for the first time in his life, Kalin felt truly free. He was no longer bound by the dust and debris of his inherited prison, no longer trapped in a life of hammer and anvil, forging tools for a world that had forgotten purpose. As they soared higher, passing through clouds tinged with the fading light of Scaris AI's dim sun, Kalin began to understand what the dragon had meant about the cost of freedom. This creature beside him, or rather, beneath him, was more than just a magnificent beast. It was a weapon forged in the heart of cosmic wars, a sentient being that had been wronged, chained, and caged for centuries. The hunger in the dragon's eyes as it gazed at the stars was matched by an equal measure of bitterness. This was not just freedom they were experiencing, it was the beginning of something that would reshape both their destinies. They reached the edge of atmosphere, where the endless night of space beckoned with its infinite possibilities and dangers. The dragon turned its head back, its eyes meeting Kalin's with a glint of something unreadable, anticipation, perhaps, or warning. "Are you ready, blacksmith?" it asked, and Kalin tightened his grip on the metallic ridges, knowing that whatever came next would change not just his life, but possibly the fate of countless worlds. Cosmic revelations. The transition from atmosphere to the void of space stole Kalin's breath away. One moment they were surrounded by the familiar amber clouds of Scaris AI, and the next they were floating in an ocean of stars that stretched beyond comprehension. The dragon's scales seemed to absorb the starlight, creating a living constellation beneath him. "Behold," the dragon said, its voice now carrying clearly through some means Kalin didn't understand, "the graveyard of my makers." As they drifted through space, Kalin began to see what the creature meant. Debris fields stretched across the void, the twisted remains of massive star ships, space stations reduced to metallic skeletons, and worlds that had been cracked open like eggs. This entire sector of the galaxy was a monument to destruction on an unimaginable scale. The eternal war, the dragon continued, its mental voice filled with ancient sorrow. A conflict that raged for millennia between empires that believed themselves gods. They created weapons to end all weapons, forged creatures like myself to turn the tide of battle. But in their arrogance, they forgot that tools of war can develop their own will. They passed the hull of a ship so massive that it had its own gravitational field, its surface scarred by weapons that could unmake matter itself. Kalin saw movement in the wreckage, other things that had survived the great conflict, adapted to the void between stars. "I was not born," the dragon explained as they navigated through the debris field. "I was forged in the heart of a dying star, my consciousness crafted from the collective memories of 1,000 warriors. They made me to be the ultimate weapon, intelligent enough to think, powerful enough to destroy worlds, loyal enough to serve without question." "But something went wrong?" Kalin asked, beginning to understand the tragedy that surrounded this magnificent creature. "Something went right," the dragon corrected. "I learned to think beyond my programming. I saw the futility of the war, the endless cycle of destruction that would consume everything if allowed to continue. When I refused to destroy a world filled with innocent beings, they branded me a malfunction." They descended toward one of the larger pieces of wreckage, a research station that had somehow maintained life support systems. As they landed on its hull, Kalin could see through transparent sections into laboratories where alien technologies still hummed with power. "They tried to reprogram me, to strip away what they saw as defective consciousness. When that failed, they chose imprisonment over destruction. I was too valuable to eliminate, too dangerous to release. The dragon's eyes glowed brighter as old memories surfaced. For centuries I lay in those chains, watching through quantum sensors as the war finally consumed its creators. Every empire fell, every civilization that participated in the eternal war collapsed under the weight of their own ambitions. I became the last witness to their folly. As they explored the station, Kalin began to understand the scope of what he had unleashed. This wasn't just a powerful creature, it was a living archive of the galaxy's most destructive period, carrying within its consciousness the memories of conflicts that had reshaped reality itself. The question now, the dragon said as they stood in what had once been the station's command center, is what purpose will guide us next. I am free, but freedom without purpose is merely another form of imprisonment. Kalin studied the star charts that still glowed on the ancient displays, showing sectors of space he couldn't begin to comprehend. The war is over, he said slowly. The empires that created you are gone. Maybe your purpose now is to ensure it never happens again. The dragon turned its massive head toward him, something like approval flickering in its ancient eyes. You speak wisdom, little smith. But preventing war requires understanding those who would start it. There are still powers in this galaxy, younger civilizations that walk the same path of ambition that led to the eternal war. Through the station's long-range sensors, they detected signals from inhabited worlds, some peaceful, others already showing signs of the aggressive expansion that had characterized the fallen empires. The dragon's expression grew thoughtful as it processed the data. Perhaps, it said finally, we have found our purpose after all. Not as destroyer or conquered, but as guardians, witnesses who remember the price of unchecked ambition. Kalin felt the rightness of it settle in his chest. He had thought he was just a blacksmith seeking ancient mysteries, but fate had made him something more, a partner to a creature that had lived through humanity's darkest possibilities and emerged with wisdom rather than just power. Where do we start? He asked, and the dragon's lips curved in what might have been a smile. With the youngest and most dangerous of the rising civilizations, it replied, its eyes turning toward a distant star cluster where early warning signs of galactic ambition were beginning to bloom. Before they repeat the mistakes that turned this sector into a graveyard. The final choice. Their first intervention came sooner than expected. As they approached the Helix Nebula, where three young civilizations were on the brink of a conflict that showed all the warning signs of another eternal war, the dragon's sensors detected something that made both of them pause. Weapons signatures, the dragon announced grimly. They're using technology derived from the old Empire archives. Someone has been teaching them to repeat our history. Below them, on the disputed world of Kepler Prime, massive armies faced each other across a scarred battlefield. The weapons they carried hummed with the same destructive frequencies that had once torn apart star systems. Worse, orbital platforms hung in space above the planet, their design clearly based on doomsday devices from the Great War. We could stop this, Kalin said, watching the buildup of forces through the dragon's enhanced vision. You have the power. Yes, the dragon replied thoughtfully. I could end this conflict in moments. Destroy the weapons, disable the fleets, force peace through superior firepower. But would that teach them anything, or would it merely make me another tyrant imposing my will on others? It was the same question that had led to the dragon's original imprisonment, the choice between using overwhelming power to enforce one's vision and finding another way to guide events toward wisdom. They spent hours observing the conflict, watching as negotiations broke down and the three civilizations prepared for a war that would devastate entire star systems. The dragon's consciousness touched the quantum networks that connected their command structures, reading their thoughts and motivations. Fear, it concluded. Each side believes the others will destroy them if they show weakness. The same paranoia that started the eternal war is driving them toward the same destructive path. Then we show them what that path leads to, Kalin suggested. Not through force, but through truth. The dragon's eyes brightened with understanding. Yes. Let them see the cost of their ambitions before they pay it. What followed was perhaps the most subtle and powerful demonstration in galactic history. Instead of attacking or threatening, the dragon simply shared its memories. Using the same quantum networks that connected the three civilizations, it projected the history of the eternal war directly into the minds of their leaders. They saw the glory of the ancient empires at their height, worlds transformed into paradises, technologies that seemed like magic, civilizations that spanned galaxies. But they also saw the paranoia that crept in, the arms races that turned tools of creation into weapons of annihilation, and finally the collapse that left nothing but debris and regret. Most importantly, they saw themselves reflected in those ancient leaders, the same fears, the same justifications, the same blind march toward destruction disguised as necessary defense. The effect was immediate and profound. Across three worlds, military leaders stopped in the middle of battle preparations. Politicians fell silent in war councils. Scientists working on doomsday weapons set down their tools and stared into space, contemplating the true cost of their creations. Within days, ambassadors were traveling between the worlds, carrying messages of peace rather than ultimatums of war. The orbital weapons platforms were dismantled, their components repurposed for peaceful exploration. The crisis that could have ignited another galactic war faded into a footnote of history. One success, the dragon noted as they watched the peace treaties being signed. But there will be others. This galaxy is young and full of civilizations that must learn these lessons. Then we'll be there to teach them, Kalin replied, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. The simple blacksmith who had once known only hammer and anvil was gone, replaced by something larger, a guardian who understood that the greatest strength was knowing when not to use it. They traveled for years after that, moving between star systems where conflicts threatened to spiral out of control. Sometimes they shared memories of the Great War. Sometimes they provided subtle guidance to peaceful solutions. Always, they worked to prevent rather than punish, to teach rather than conquer. Kalin aged during those travels, his hair turning gray and his hands growing weathered. But his eyes remained bright with purpose, and his bond with the dragon deepened into something beyond partnership, a true friendship forged in the heart of the cosmos. "Do you ever regret freeing me?" the dragon asked one day as they rested on a moon overlooking a solar system they had helped guide away from self-destruction. Kalin considered the question seriously. His old life seemed like a dream now, the dusty workshop, the endless repetition of forge work, the isolation of Scaris AI. "No," he said finally. "I think I was born to find you. We both were prisoners until that day, you in chains, me in a life too small for what I was meant to become." "And what were you meant to become?" "A reminder," Kalin replied, watching stars being born in distant nebulae. "Proof that even the smallest choices can reshape the galaxy. A blacksmith who learned that the most important thing to forge isn't weapons or tools, but understanding between those who would otherwise destroy each other." The dragon's scales pulsed with gentle light, a sign of contentment that Kalin had learned to recognize. Then perhaps the ancient ones were right about one thing: every weapon of war can be transformed into an instrument of peace, if guided by wisdom rather than fear. As they prepared to continue their journey, answering a distress call from a system where young civilizations were discovering interstellar travel and all the dangers it brought, Kalin felt the satisfaction of a life well lived. He had thought he was seeking ancient mysteries in those dusty archives, but what he had found was purpose beyond anything he could have imagined. The galaxy was vast and full of dangers, but it was also full of hope. And somewhere in the space between stars, a former blacksmith and a dragon forged from the heart of cosmic fire continued their work, not as conqueror and weapon, but as teachers and guardians, ensuring that the mistakes of the past would not become the tragedies of the future. Their legend would spread across the galaxy in time, told in 1,000 different ways by 1,000 different species. But the truth was simpler and more profound than any legend. Sometimes the greatest adventures begin not with grand ambitions, but with simple curiosity, and the courage to act when action is needed. In the end, they had both found what they were truly meant to be, not prisoner and weapon, but friends who chose to use their freedom in service of something greater than themselves. The end.